Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming, and thank you to the Bayliss Society for having me. And let's just say I'm usually not very brief. I go on and on and on, so I only have 30.
I'm sitting here, so.
Yeah, she's going to give me this. So if I run too long or we run out of time for a Q&A, save your questions for when we're out on the railway, and you can pepper me while we're looking at that unique device out there. Before I get started, I just wanted to say we're at really the perfect spot for this topic because I always felt that this property, the former Burnham Brothers Marine Railway, is the keystone that connects our past to our present and hopefully our future now that we're Maritime Gloucester. This property transcends Gloucester history. And when we're talking primarily about our fishing industry, this property has seen basically every major change and innovation that took place. This is where we went from, from ice to salt, from wood to steel, from hooks to nets, from sail to engine. It all took place right here. So what better spot than to talk about the soul of Cape Ann, the heart of our harbor right here. So I also want to thank our friends at our other institutions in town, especially Sawyer Free Library and Cape Ann Museum. I wouldn't have been able to do a lot of this research until a lot of this information has been digitized. So I thank Martha and our friends at Sawyer Free for making this information accessible. This would have taken me years to do before we had all this technology. So let's start with the Burnham Brothers. So today we have a Burnham still on site, still building boats. So it's a fun connection because although we know the Burnham Brothers as running this marine railway we have outside, which is currently the oldest machine like it in the whole country, the Burnham Brothers were shipbuilders like so many Burnhams from Essex. And their father was Captain Parker Burnham, who was one of the most famous shipbuilders of his time. His record includes one of my favorite stories from the Essex yards. He built the schooner July in 1 month back in 1835. That's why they named it July. So that's the record. I don't think Harold's going to touch that anytime soon. And one of my other favorite stories, and I'm wondering if his sons carried that over here, is up until 1835, you got 2 rum breaks a day in shipyards. And it was Captain Burnham over in his shipyard in Essex, which is probably currently a part of the Essex Shipbuilding Museum yard, where he said, hey, instead of taking money out of your wages for rum, I'll give you free coffee. And they unanimously voted, and I think the productivity improved after that as well. So I'd like to think that they brought that tradition down here. I have no way to verify it, but it makes for a good story for our future mug-up room downstairs. So the 3 brothers we're talking about are Parker, Elias, and Joseph B. Burnham. And they arrive in the 1830s. And then when they start, getting older, and people didn't live very long on the waterfront back then, so their sons took over. This was the next generation. So we had another set of Burnham brothers. They were the sons of Parker Burnham and Elias Burnham. So sometimes when you're trying to figure out who's what, the younger brothers, the younger generation go by their initials: Elias P. Burnham, Parker H. Burnham, and then Elias's brother Enoch Burnham. So as far as geography, this is where we're going to be talking about today. Now the Burnhams get here in 1838. That's the earliest reference I have of them in town, coming here as shipbuilders. And they're setting up shop originally on what was Pierce's Wharf. That's basically underneath the freezer today. Colonel Pierce was a really big name in the trading history of Gloucester, especially the Suriname trade. And then number 2 here we have the old William Collins Wharf, which is roughly at the corner of I-4C2 and the Building Center. And then our current site today is number 3. That at the time was known as Parker Burnham and Brothers. That's our current site. So this map is the 1851 H.F. Walling map. It was a big deal when it was published back then. It was the most accurate depiction of the harbor, and it's great because we can still use it today to see where everyone lived. You can see the streets, and the The waterfront you're seeing here, this is all before fill, long before urban renewal, and so you're seeing more of a natural geography here, and this is what the Burnhams were setting up. So when they get here in the 1830s, building on Pierce's Wharf, they were also contracting out for building boats up in Amesbury. They had a cousin, Cyrus Burnham, and I have a feeling, after doing a little bit more research, the reason why they started building down here and then also in Amesbury is because Essex was running out of wood. This is pretty much the end of building Essex schooners out of Essex lumber. And so this is the beginning of rafting timbers down the Merrimack, so Amesbury would be a perfect spot. And of course, Gloucester is the final destination. So I have a feeling that these three brothers figured, why are we going to build boats 4 miles up a creek without any wood when we can go closer to our customers? So right here we got some advertisements for those early boats, and I'm sure there's other ones, but these are the ones that I've found so far. By 1845, they're expanding their business, and they have bought the old William Collins Wharf. So again, that's down by the building center, and this painting by Fitzhenry Lane, next time you're walking by the sign of the building center, you're basically looking at this scene. Now the advertisement you see here says that they're going to work on blocks, mast hoops, carpentering business. So they're expanding their business beyond just shipbuilding. Now they're getting into chandlery, they're getting into vessel repair. And up until I took a good look at this painting, I didn't realize they were building on that spot. But as you can see here, they're building a small vessel. They got a little steam house right there. My friend Eric Romberg mentioned that they were probably making barrels because you see some shooks down there. And of course, you see the slowly building up of the fort at that time as well. So this is just a quick reference to a book that we've probably all read here, that's Bear of the Sea, or The Great Patillo by Joe Garland. This is just talking about how Captain Jim Patillo was a pioneer in new innovations. And in the 1840s, new designs were coming in. The older salt bankers, the stodgy old vessels in the colonial days were being replaced by faster, more extreme designs that we would call sharpshooters and clippers. And Captain Patillo, one of the highliners of his day, had his new vessel down here, getting ready. So they launched it right here. And as far as what those vessels looked like, this is the sail plan of the Romp. That was the design that kind of set the stage. And this is where we start getting into the whole lore of racing the boat home. Before that, your fish was all salted. Didn't really matter who came in first. We're going to switch over to an ice-based fishery. First boat in gets the best price, and guys being guys, well, we're going to race anyway. So this is the kind of the beginning of all that and all the legacy that follows. So now we're getting to the point where the Burnhams are being settled roughly where we are today. In December of 1850, the Burnham Brothers purchased this site and some adjoining property that's no longer part of our campus from Benjamin K. Huff. As the Huff family that did a lot of merchant trading back in the days. And this map here from 1859 is showing you, again, some of that layout. So Pierce's Wharf, where they got started, is probably underneath that big concrete freezer. And then we have the area, you can see the Marine Railway on this map here. And in between, I have another dock pointed out called Caswell's Graving Dock. Before we had the Marine Railway, there was a spot in town for larger boats to get repair. You got to remember, this is the days of sail before we had bottom paint, like that famous paint factory. These boats were covered in barnacles, they had shipworms, seaweed. There was no great way to take all that growth off, so it required a bit of maintenance. And for the Gloucester's merchant fleet, they would go over to the Caswell property, which was not too far from where Declan's is today. There's a little wharf that would stick out, and they called it Caswell's Graving Dock. And what they would do is they'd pull up these merchant vessels, they tie it up to the pier, let the tide run out, and do as much scraping and painting as they could before the tide came back up. Not exactly the most efficient way, but that's what we had back then. Dry docks were way beyond the means of small merchant fleets and fishermen. You had to go to the Navy Yard to find that. So graving docks, graving beaches were the order of the day. And here's an example from Lane showing a vessel beached for repairs. So before our property gets started, this is what the growing Gloucester fleet in the 1840s, the fleet that is soon to eclipse Marblehead as America's greatest fishing fleet. We have hundreds of schooners already in the harbor, and what do they have to do to get the barnacles off? They gotta go find a beach. So, as you can see here, it's labor intensive. This is caulking and graving. Pavilion Beach, where I grew up, that was a graving place, both the beach side, the outer harbor side, and the Harbor Cove side, which is now the town landing. You had vessels pulled up right here, scraped down, caulked the seams, they're boiling tar, and then hopefully that next tide is high enough to get this thing back in the water. So as this is all happening, the Burnhams are realizing that maybe the money isn't in building the boats. Maybe it's repairing and maintaining this growing fleet. We get all different numbers of how big the fleet was in the 1840s and 1850s because we have a lot of transient boats coming in at the time. So let's just say on any given day, you have at least 250 schooners in the given area that all need some sort of maintenance after any given trip. So just like one of my old history professors used to say, in a gold rush, you don't dig for gold, you sell the shovels. And so that's what they did. They basically kind of gave up on the shipbuilding. They built less and less, and they started repairing more and more. And in 1851, in January of 1851, they and several businessmen petitioned the Mass General Court saying that Gloucester desperately needs a marine railway to maintain this growing fleet. And so that's the very beginning. And notice how I said 1851. Some of you, if you're from town, have heard your whole lives that our marine railway dates to 1849. And I towed that line as well because we all stand on the shoulders of those who did the research before us. Not so. We're still America's oldest working marine railway. We just lost a couple years in my research. So we're a little younger, a little more spry. Because by May 17th, 1851, we get the first announcement in the Gloucester papers that the Burnham Brothers have completed their marine railway. And that's it. That one little blurb is all I found. By the end of the month, the Boston Traveler has caught wind of what we did up here, and they have a much bigger write-up. And they also talk a little bit of the newer designs, the new extreme clipper models. They're up to 80 to 100 tons burthen. That's going to be a little bit smaller than, Adventure Outside's about 100 tons. This is more like 75 tons. This is before we did the decimalization. This is the older measurement. Still fairly big boats for their day. And then by September, Gloucester's starting to come around on it. So we have a little clip here about a vessel being hauled out with the cargo still in. So this thing, which I'm just still gathering anecdotal evidence, but it sounded like when they first set up this track out here, people didn't know what to do. They were a little curious. They didn't know if this was going to work. But by the end of that year, we're starting to see more clippings like this where they're kind of praising the Gloucester mechanics. Of course, a mechanic back then was any kind of handy person, so the definition has changed. But you start seeing pride not just in the fleet, but you're seeing pride in the landward infrastructure because you can't have one without the other. You got to remember also that in 1847, the train had arrived. So all of a sudden, these markets have opened up for Gloucester fish. So you can't just grow one side of the business without the other. It has to grow in pace. And that's what's just starting to happen right now in the 1850s. So they were so successful that they had to build a second track. And by 1854, it was done. And we're going to take a look at this very famous painting by Lane, which you can see. It's not on display right now, is it, Martha? So in the future, you'll be able to see this beautiful painting. It's actually my favorite one because it was a store sign. This big, beautiful painting painted for John Trask's paint shop, which at one point, before we had the current brick building that we see outside that houses our hauling gears, there was a big wooden structure. You can kind of see this. Right here I have the clipping of the 1856 HF Walling map. And what you're seeing is you see the two tracks. And the longer track leads to kind of a blocky-shaped building. That's the building that this paint shop was in. And that's the original mill building that housed the gears, that housed the planing shed, the sawmill, and it's all obscured in Lane's painting by this, the California, which was a three-masted Suriname sugar wagon, as they used to call them back then. So this was part of the other part of our merchant history, our maritime history at this time. We had a quite sizable merchant fleet, and at this point we were still monopolizing the trade with Suriname. Shameless plug, if you want to know more about the Suriname trade, my blog will have a post tomorrow, the last coffee plantation in Suriname. I'm actually trying to recontact some of the connections and see if there's any remnants of Gloucester's trade down there. And
give the name of your blog.
historicalvagabond.com. I need all the followers I can get. Sorry for the shameless plug. So anyway, this painting shows a lot, and it shows the setup of the Burnham's property right before a very important moment happens for them. 2 years after this painting is finished and is hanging up at Trask's shop, this whole operation almost went away. And I'm going to get to that in a moment. I forgot I had another slide. So this is also the beginning of their planing and sawing mills. So as they're building this big wooden structure that runs 200 feet down, probably to where the Declan's parking lot is today, they're now expanding their steam capacity. They're running belt-driven thickness planers. They have a big sawmill down there so they can rip planks. They're becoming a full-service facility. You can get everything, any kind of ship carpentry done down here. And if they can't do it, well, the neighborhood that's springing up all around Fitzhenry's Lane house up on the hill is full of craftspeople that are for hire. So you were really in, by 1859, you were in a spot where this was a big, part of the Gloucester infrastructure. This is where all the tradespeople were. There were boarding houses being set up. So I like to think of this as like the Wild East back then. This is very much the boomtown section of Gloucester, and it only gets more exciting as time goes on. But in May of 1859, there's a huge fire that breaks out, and according to the papers at the time, this is the biggest fire in town and the biggest loss in property value between the two famous fires that wiped out Main Street. And it almost put them completely out of business. It destroyed the front half of their building, destroyed the steam engines, the mill equipment. And as you can see, there were 2 vessels on their railways. They had to cut the chains, and the boats rolled down like roller coasters and damaged the ends of the tracks. So our track today runs about 300 feet out into the harbor. They didn't run that far back then. Actually, the Burnhams petitioned the state every couple of years or so to extend the tracks out to make it safer for them to haul boats. So when these boats rolled down, they just went flop off the tidal flat and wrecked the ends of the tracks. Even Parker Burnham, he was badly burned. He was trying to release that chain, and in our where our gears are, we have this big like dead man brake, a pawl. He tried to lift that up, and he burned his hands in the process. It was about $7,000 of damage in 1859 money. They were insured for about half of that. So this was almost the end of the Burnham Brothers, not too long after they began. But they were able to manage. They started shortly after that. They started erecting a fireproof building. They even put a covering over their steam engines to get things going. They had one track going to start, and from what I can tell, they also they put the property up for sale, and thankfully nobody bought it. But they did sell off chunks of their surrounding area. That's probably how they got enough capital to keep going. And this picture here, which is pretty well known around, I colorized it just to kind of make it pop. I believe that the man in the carriage is one of the older Burnham brothers. He's been identified various times, but I'm pretty sure that's Elias Burnham, because by this time, I think Parker Burnham was a little, by the 1880s of this picture, Parker Burnham had already passed. But this is our mill building, which Gino Mondello runs as the Dory Shop today. And if I could take you inside, what you would see down in the basement is a series of brick arches supported by iron strapping. This is very early jack arc mill architecture that was brought over from England. I've been contacting a former curator of the Lowell Mills and showed him some pictures of our architecture, and he said this is roughly 1850s to 1860s fireproofing mill architecture. It was designed to absorb vibrations and supposedly fireproof. We learned later on, about 100 years after this, it wasn't as fireproof as they thought. But the building is still here, and the top floor, which is now the dory shop, and you can see here, was their planing mill. And then later on, they're going to have a grist mill. I'm going to talk about that shortly, but you can see a little bit of that sign. And then behind them, we have a wooden building. That is their carpenter shop. And then right behind the man standing on the planks, you see another building. That would have been right out your window this way. That was the rigging loft. Now, you can't have an old-fashioned sawmill around without having some serious sawmill accidents. And this was, let's just say, this was a dangerous place to work all the way up until the end. We have people that remember, that used to work on site that remember getting guys' fingers cut off. It happened. And this sawmill, which is still in place down in the lower level in our gear house, it's not set up. But last time it was used was about the year 2000, thereabouts. And I've joked with Doug Parsons that this is the most terrifying thing on site. I really hope we don't get this thing going again. And he laughed at me. But I told him I was reading a lot of accounts of accidents here. And Joseph B. Burnham, one of the brothers, he eventually divests from the company, and I have a feeling one of the reasons is this narrow escape where he almost lost it right here on the sawmill, tore apart his jacket. But he said, he almost was instantly killed. And then later on, his nephew Elias P. Burnham, who would end up being one of the presidents of this organization. He had a very horrible accident, and this isn't the first accident for Elias P. I feel bad for this guy. He said he had a pretty rough time down here in the shipyard. It wasn't just dangerous out at sea. You had plenty of chances to hurt yourself on land as well. Unfortunately, you don't make any kind of list for hurting yourself maintaining the fleet. So in 1860, we started having some changes. Now, like I said, Joseph Burnham, probably after that little mishap in the sawmill, he leaves and he buys some property just down on Pierce Street, which is the next block over. And for years, he runs a planing business. But as I was looking up, what else he did, there's some fun facts. So in 1861, he was commissioned by the town to rebuild the famous Annisquam footbridge, which has since been rebuilt, but the one, if you remember the burned out one that was around for a long time, that was the one that was closed when I was a kid. He's the one that built that. And earlier I was mentioning the old measurement, tons burthen. Well, that all changes in 1865 when the government switches to decimalized measurements of boats. So this is where we get the gross tons and net tons that we still use today when we measure vessels like fishing boats. Joseph B. Burnham was assigned to that task of going out and actually physically measuring this fleet to get the new measurements. We also, at this time, see a lot of times, once again, they're trying to sell the railway. And what they do instead is they end up selling basically the section of property we're on today. They're going to take this back in the future, but where we're standing, and the pier behind me is going to be sold to a man named A.W. Dodd. And for a long time, this is going to be known as Dodd's Wharf. And he's going to run it as a fish oil business. So there used to be a big steam plant right here that turned cod livers and pogies into fish oil, both for pharmaceutical and for industrial uses. Later on, he became a competitor to Lee Page's. I don't know which one came first, but Dodd's liquid glue was always second to Lee Page's in the market. but they had a great advertising line that was seen on billboards across the country. It used to say, "Dodds liquid fish glue will stick to anything." So once Joseph Burnham leaves, the name of the business changes. Up until this point, they're known as Parker Burnham and Brothers. This is where they're restructured as Burnham Brothers Marine Railway. Now, where else but Gloucester do you have a couple of industrial guys that are working on a marine industrial site that decide, you know what, grain prices are going up, and we got a little horsepower we can spare. Let's get into the grain business. All right, if that's not a Gloucester story, I don't know what is. So this is all taking place roughly around the time of the economic panic of the 1870s. This is what was the original Great Depression. And they decided to invest and use some of that steam power to create a grist mill in the mill building. So if you ever go to Gino's shop, the area where he's not building boats, he's got a little back alcove. That is probably where the grist mill was. There's holes in the floor where the belts would come up from the steam engine to run it on belts. And here's some of the ads over the years. So yeah, this was in operation by 1870. And they kept on going until about World War I, when grain prices dropped like a rock and it was no longer profitable. But as the second generation of Burnhams started coming of age, this was a section of the business that they started handling. So there was a branch of the Burnham Brothers Marine Railway known as Burnham's Hay and Grain. So Michael has heard me say this over and over on tours, but just think, you could come down here and get your boat hauled out. You can get a couple of planks sawn, and while you're at it, get some flour ground for your wife, get some corn ground for your animals out on the farm, and then they're going to stuff all the mattresses and pillowcases with all the chaff. So, I mean, no wasted movement. That is truly Gloucester, right? Everyone has 3 jobs, and no one's ever unemployed. Maybe underemployed, but never unemployed.
Justin?
Yep. Oh, we're getting quick. So I'm going to skip this. You'll have to ask me about this later. So here, yeah, that's a fun story. Maybe I'll even put it on the blog. But yeah, we had a fun Russian visitor unannounced. So here's just a quick map of the layout of the land back in the 1880s. You can see the different additions. The rigging loft in 1870 from Addison Witham was our first rigger on site. You can see now that the mill building has 2 wooden structures on top. That's for storage for the grain. A.W. Dodd's business is right there. And then the wharf, there's a building on the wharf for the New England Fish Company. And I think Cape Ann Museum has a little bit on that with the Blatchford exhibit. So if you want to know more about New England Fish Company and the unloading of halibut, take a look at the Blatchford exhibit. This is just an example of the expansion of the wharfs. Like I said before, they had to keep expanding the wharfs out for protection, and it also allowed them to haul bigger boats. And here's a map from the Sanborn Company, and this is great. You can download these on Library of Congress, zoom right in, and you can get all sorts of fun details of what was on our site and the surrounding area. These are incredible. I highly recommend you check them out if you're doing any research on your property. So over here, this is just a little bit on the 1890s. We see a classic Fredonia, the Susan R. Stone hauled out. And then we got some vessels sailing around just off our piers on what was known as the deep hole. That was a natural deep part of the harbor where the freighters would go before we dredged the channel. This picture here, also colorized, shows you the grain building across the street, which would be roughly now where that big rock is over on the hill. But that was first the office for the grain, and then later on it became the office for the Burnham Brothers until they built the building we're in today. Here's a couple of images of Dodd's Wharf. That's the building that used to be on the pier. That was for unloading halibut. And here's another view of it looking from the seaside, and you can also see how big the Dodd Company's factory was back then. Supposedly, the brick building that you walked in, that's our gift shop in front, is built from the bricks of that chimney you saw in the last picture. And unfortunately, I can't dive in deeply on this, but lots of accidents, All sorts of interesting things happening at the turn of the century. And if you want to know how they used to step the masts on those old schooners, we had a big derrick at the end of the pier. You can see these guys stepping the mast for a lumber schooner, and I couldn't help but colorize that one as well. In 1911, the railway is now looking the way you see it today, thanks to the Crandall Company. They have maintained this this facility up until now. Even when Jay was doing the restorations, the Crandalls came down and gave us the information we needed. Here's another view just showing seaward side of a steam tug and a lighter on the way, so it's not just fishing boats. Here's a little bit of the company changes. Gristmill goes away. Burnham Brothers become incorporated. Here's what the site looks like at the time. No more Dodd. This is now Steel Abbott Paint. Some of you might remember Steel Abbott. They used to be on Main Street. They used to do boat paint, then they did house paint, and they made it all here until a fire burned it down. That's kind of a recurring theme here. This place burned down a lot. 1918, this is just a fun one because the whole harbor froze and no one could get hauled out. It took a month for the icebreakers to break channels through here and for it to thaw enough for the guys to haul out a boat. So that was the last time that the harbor froze to this thickness. As you can see, people were walking all the way up to 10 Pound Island. Now, I mentioned before this was really important as far as changing over. So I just want you to take a really quick look at, there was changes happening at this time. If you had a vessel that wanted to stay competitive, you came here and got a new gasoline or oil engine installed. And that's the beginning, the dawn of modern fishing, as I like to say. I have to say just briefly, the racing fishermen, Clayton Morrissey and the Henry Ford were hauled out here before their race with the Blue Nose. But the place was closing down. The Burnhams, the second generation, were getting on in years. The last haul out was September 30th, 1922. After 70 years, they officially closed, but it really wasn't a full closing. They actually used it, the neighbors, the Parkhurst Railway, actually started using this facility and then bought it outright by 1925. And so the next chapter, which is going to be another slideshow in the future, talks about the next generation, which is the Parkhurst chapter. So this is just where we end here. This is the ends of the Burnhams. And they all died before 1930. Parker H was the last one, and sadly died at the depot of a heart attack. That must have been pretty rough. Again, I really apologize for blowing through a lot of these, but there's a lot more to be told, but there's so many great people that want to talk. Again, if you have any questions of what I've shown you today, hit me up when we do the railway or come and visit me on our future tour. Thank you so much.